I've let go of ego and I never judge, right? Because how can you, when you've been through a lot yourself and you imagine, wow, well, imagine everyone judged me for those momentary lapse in judgment for the rest of my life. Those moments don't define you, they're just meant to guide you. I'm not perfect, no one is, but as long as I, strive to be better, I'm happy with that.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. We are well into the new year now. Thank you all for the support. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe or follow. If you're watching on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, drop a review. It helps the show grow. I really appreciate it. Also, check out the show notes. Pick up a copy of Break Barriers or Audacious. I will sign it and mail it to you myself. I am very excited for today's episode. Today's episode came by referral from a past guest, Shaun Moamem. He is a co-founder of Empire National Title Agency. He brings his extensive expertise in real estate and title services to the forefront. With focuses on business development in the New York metro area, Empire National has become one of the fastest growing, most recognizable names in title insurance in the region. He has years of experience in all aspects of real estate, having worked in residential, commercial, leasing, and sales, as well as management. Over the years, Shaun has worked on deals with notable retailers, tenants such as Bloomberg Philanthropies, Chick-fil-A, Dunkin' Donuts, and the Ainsworth. Shaun also worked with landlords including the Moynihan Group, Peak Capital Advisors, AD Real Estate, Aurora Capital, TriStar, and the Library Hotel Collection, just to name a few. Shaun, I am excited to dive in with you today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited as well.
You got it, man. You got it. Listen, man, your bio was all professional. So now we want to dig in. We gotta get to know the real you, because I know there's a lot more behind the surface there. So let's kick things off. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up, where life began for you.
Sure. So I was born in Queens. I'm a New Yorker, born and bred. And I was then, as a little kid, moved to Long Island with my parents, who at the time were together. And I grew up most of my childhood in Great Neck, Long Island, which was great. And then they got divorced as a young kid. I stayed in Great Neck through high school. Once I graduated, my mom moved to the city, who I spent most of my time with. My dad. Uh, I don't know exactly where, but all over, from like the Middle East to other parts of New York to other parts of the country here as well. And then eventually, family moved back to Long Island for the most part, Huntington. And then I did a little stint in Miami during COVID, but for the most part, I've been on the Upper East Side for most of my adult life. Dabbled here and there in different parts of New York City, but I'm an Upper East Sider.
Got it. Got it. Did you have any siblings?
No, only child. My parents divorced when I was very young, about 3, 4 years old. It's funny enough, they're both on their third relationships, third husband and wives, and never had kids with any of the others. So I
You
do
were the
have,
one.
yeah. So I was the one, couldn't match up. So why go for a second time when they did it the first time perfectly, right? No, I'm just kidding. But I do have two stepbrothers with my mom's partner. So
Got it. Got it.
that's about it.
Got it. So you were 3, 4 years old when they got divorced. You mentioned your dad. You weren't really, sure where he was. Kind of international. What nationality was he?
So my dad was born and raised in Iran, in Tehran,
Okay.
Iran.
Okay.
Yeah, still not really a big part of my life. More so when I was a kid, but things are funny. It's a traditional, old school man from a very traditional conservative country. You don't get divorced. You die before you divorce,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And I think it was very difficult for him because when they moved here, my mom is younger, is about 9, 10 years younger than my dad, and more Americanized because of that, right? She was raised more years here in the States, and more enlightened thought process because of it. So, I think for him it was very difficult, and he took a lot of the hate he had, or anger, I should say, he had on her out on me by not being around. I think that, let's say, for example, coming to one of my soccer games, which was a big part of my life and a big part of my story, and I'll tell you about. But like it started maybe being on the same sideline to maybe being on the other sideline to maybe being at the parking lot to not even waiting around to say good game at the end. So for me, I was raised, mostly by a single mom. So that's how I
Got
look
it.
at it.
Got
Yeah.
it. Thanks for opening up about this early on too in the episode. I do feel like, just in the last 3 minutes of this intro, this had to have played a significant role in everything that happened thereafter. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's a piece of this that lives within you, whether it's the lessons that you've learned or whether it's the impact of the experience.
Oh, for sure. Both. The impact of the experience, is felt because, of course, most young boys and young men want to have someone to look up to, someone to emulate, right? And for me, that was a confusing thing. And then now, how it affects me is I'm a father. I have a daughter, which, of course, is a different relationship from, father to son and to father to daughter. But I do my best to make sure she knows that I'm always around, right? And I'm always there for her. And I learned that, from having someone that wasn't always, around. So definitely played a big part of my life. It still does. I've seen my dad maybe once in the last 10 years, and he's never met his granddaughter. So obviously, it's a lot, but, I think more so it was also the fact that I add into that I'm an only child. So I think one of the big, most people don't think about their longest relationships in their lives. They think it's their parents or they think it's their significant other. And in reality, it's their siblings.
Talk to me about the relationship you had with your mother.
It is always evolving. It's, it was great. My mom did everything she could to give me a better life, sacrificed a lot of her time and energy and definitely money to provide for me to feel, you know, feel like I belonged, right? To feel like I was worthy, whether that meant to go out of her way to hurt herself financially. She made sure I had the things that, well, there was the new soccer cleats that were popular or whatever. So I think as I've gotten older, I've appreciated that and recognized that. Whereas, now I'm a working adult, right? Versus when I was younger, I probably didn't. Probably gave her a hard time. Didn't understand what she was going through and appreciate her because of it as much. But we're very close. We still have our, like any mother would have with a son. Doesn't matter how old you are, you're always their baby. So we do have arguments where I'm like, hey, I'm not, not a kid anymore. But she's like, you'll always be my kid. So we're cool.
Yeah. We've had a lot of stories come on like this of situations of divorce at different ages, and every story is unique. Um, with you, because you were so young, and you had alluded to this already, right? Like that father figure was missing. Um, when you think about growing up in the different phases, especially when it happens that young, there's the phase of, elementary school and then high school. And then obviously you're out into the real world and college and all that. And I feel like I can't put myself in your shoes, but if I were, I feel like there would be a constant chip on my shoulder to to live up, because I don't have to live up to someone's expectations, live up to who I think my father would want me to be. Can you speak to that? Is that something that, kind of
Yeah, I
played a role
to
for you?
to me, to be honest, I don't think that I had a chip on my shoulder because of it. I think for me, I kind of, it's funny, only children get a negative connotation, that they're all selfish. In reality, we're all just stubborn. but we're not all selfish. Some are selfish. My toys, my this, my, my, and the others are the, which I believe I fall into the category of, are the ones who yearn for, the attention, overshare, do anything they can, FOMO, you know what I mean? And so much so where they treat their friends and friends of friends as brothers and sisters, even when they necessarily don't treat them back that way. So I don't think I ever had a terribly big chip on my shoulder because life came pretty naturally for me. I was, a good student without having to really buckle down. I was a, great athlete without really working like, as hard as Ronaldo. So I think for me, I didn't get a chip on my shoulder till, the post high school college days. I think then my chip on my shoulder came because I think you don't appreciate or recognize things where, like, for example, as a young kid, I grew up in a pretty wealthy town, right? An affluent town. Of course, there was discrepancies even in those towns, right? There's the super
There's the
affluent,
super rich,
right?
and
There's
then there's
super rich. Yeah. Then there's rich. And then there's,
middle
usually
class, upper
everybody
middle.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah, upper middle, and then usually everybody else, right? So, we weren't in that area, in that upper level, right? The rich and super rich. And I think as a kid, though, you don't realize that, right? When you're 8, 7, you go to someone's house, you might be like, oh, this is a big house, but you don't appreciate the fact, oh, maybe their father worked really hard for that house, or their grandfather helped to build a business that their father's now working in, or whatever it is. And I think, because of my, natural, uh, great, progression in my life. Like I got lucky with a lot of things. I did well in school. I was a great soccer player. That I was fortunate enough to have friends and fortunate enough to, do well socially. So I don't think I had any chip on my shoulder until I started to, realize because like you don't appreciate those things at a young age. Oh, this is a super nice car. Okay, great. Their dad drives a nice car, but you don't have the understanding to equate that to a certain dollar value that allows them
The
a
work
certain.
that brought that car.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You don't understand those concepts like money equals freedom or hard work equals money, right? Or certain things like that. You're just like, this is my friend, right? And so I don't think the chip came until I was at an age where it was like, hey, I got full ride offers to certain colleges. Like you kind of have to take one of these full rides. We're
Huh.
not your friends' parents.
Huh.
You can't, we got you a great car, but we can't pay for, X, Y, and Z. You can't, you don't have your father's business, whatever, one of those conversations. Right. So I think at that point I was like, then I had a chip like, why not me? Or why not my parents? Or why not my mom make a, better decision? And then I was just angry at at a lot of people and myself. But but I didn't, I didn't show it. If anything, I hid it. And if anything, I think that's the part of my life where the mask became even greater and I became even more concerned with approval. And because I knew I didn't have the big, bank account for my family, or my family didn't have a big bank account for me, right? Like like I was born, should have been born into it or something, that I then needed people to love me even more, like me even more. And I felt like I was always, at a young age, I was a curator and a leader, and I, helped us. We're going here tonight, or I helped pick the club, or whatever it was during the different, even from a younger age. Hey, this is where we're going. This is, and then to an older age, that I thought that added value, that they would then see the value in me and stay with me, even if I couldn't afford, let's say, the same nice material things, right? So, that was part of my evolution, which was like, all right, I now have to add value and be special for other things. How can I be special? Like, oh, okay. And actually led me into a big part of my other part of my career, which is a hospitality career. So I spent a lot of times working both shifts of the day, whether it was day showing real estate apartments at 18 while playing soccer at Fordham, which is a school I decided to take the full scholarship of. I got my real estate license too. So I would show apartments when I could. And then I'd worked in, bars and restaurants. I bar backed, I bartended, I doorman, I did whatever was needed. And whatever I thought was, cool and adding value and also making some money in the process. But I didn't care for the money. I cared for, you know, the to save it. I cared for it for the ability to stick with my other friends who were just jumped into working or, had, credit cards or big inheritances, right? So that was my reasoning for doing that. So
Well, it's cool that you knew the value of I mean, you were an athlete clearly, so you understood, hard work. But, to your point, the fact that you can apply it outside, um, that says something about you at a young age, right? Like, you're willing to put in the work. And I'm sure as this story is going to play out, you're going to come to a realization of, what mattered in life that maybe you thought mattered previously that didn't matter at the time that you were doing it. But the ability to kind of do all that at once, and none of those jobs in particular are easy. Combine that with being a collegiate athlete. And what division is Fordham? Is it
Division One. It's a
Division
Division
One?
One.
That's
Yeah,
what I
and
thought.
in
Yeah.
soccer, it's part of the A10, which is Atlantic 10, which is a bigger school, conference
Yes,
than
so you're a
other
D1
sports.
you're a D1 athlete, which is demanding in and of itself. And on top of that, you're putting in the work to do all this other stuff. And just kind of hearing that part, like if I didn't, and I don't know you that well, but as far as I know you, like you're someone that I would be proud of just knowing like that's your foundation right there, right? Like knowing where you are today and knowing that's how you got started, that's pretty awesome to kind of to hear how that plays out. So talk to me a little bit about like the steps from there to getting you to kind of get to center with what is important in life.
Well, yeah. So it's funny because soccer is something we've mentioned a few times now. Soccer was, I think, for most of my life, most of my young life, my North Star. Like everything revolved around my soccer calendar. I was fortunate enough to grow up making some lifelong friends from soccer as well. I think a big part of where it went wrong was when I kind of started thinking, oh, soccer, where's it really going to get me in life? And giving up on it and seeing my friends who were working, making, three times, four times what a average soccer player makes in the MLS at that time, right? This is, 18, 20 years ago is a little different than it is now. But even now, the top 10% of the MLS make about 70% of the salaries, the Messis of the world, obviously, right? So soccer still isn't what it these other major sports are here today, but imagine what it was then. It was even less so. So I think having that, like you said, I had that work ethic. I loved going to practice. I enjoyed competing every moment. And then when I lost that and I gave up on it, I think that's when my life took a shift. One, I think, you need to let out that energy elsewhere, and it navigated towards, following. I definitely, shifted from what was I thought was a time of leadership to a more follower type mindset. Well, hey, this is what these guys think are cool, or hey, this is what I should be doing. And then how do I navigate that to the best of my ability, right? Like, how do I navigate nightlife and and like things that girls think are cool and guys think are cool and stuff like that. And I lost my North Star, which is, having that workout, having that good sleep, having uh, you know, uh, an idea of self, yeah, regimen, but also an idea of self-worth, right? Soccer, I was the soccer star in my high school. I led New York State in goals my senior year of high school. My principal loved soccer, like the parents loved soccer. My mom still talks about my soccer career, So I think losing that led me down a different path of, who am I? What do I do? And I didn't. think of my life. I was too maybe young and immature to think of my next chapter of my life as a career. It was more like, what's my next thing to enjoy? I don't know what a career is for me. I just know that I'm not happy and I need that, next piece of happiness or satisfaction. And I, chased it in many forms. So.
I love that you brought that up. I think that, that's very central to the show, right? The idea of the role that soccer played in not just that part of your life, but even now, you can't take away what you learned from those years on the field. And there's a buildup, right? Like it starts from just being a young boy, right? Like looking up to your favorite athletes. Like who's your favorite soccer player?
I'm probably messy now. At that time it was R9 who was like the original Ronaldo for us, for us, for us older soccer players, Cristiano Ronaldo, and then this was R9 was the phenomenon. He was the Brazilian Ronaldo.
Yeah, and when you think about just being a young kid, and then kind of going into high school and now you're at a collegiate level, like you never lose that awe for those players that played such a significant role in getting you to be who you were when you were out on the field. And I don't think that really goes away, when once you're off the field, right? Because you're always coming back to center with regards to those key tenors that made those players successful, that ultimately played a role in getting to where you were when you were, playing during those days. Um, and so I, I I think that that's a really important aspect to all this. And you had brought up once you had moved on from playing, and now you're thinking about that shift from leadership to, in your words, becoming more of a follower and kind of trying to figure out what it is that those people around you wanted out of you. It kind of brings me back to where we started off this episode when you were talking about your parents and getting divorced. And we haven't touched on it, but talk to me a little bit about your experience with just building relationships in general, given the fact that your cornerstone relationship, it wasn't really intact, right? Like, what was it like for you, whether it was building relationships with teammates over the years or relationships even with girls over the years?
Yeah, I think for me, as I mentioned earlier, socially, I was very fortunate. I think I naturally, I think because of my situation where, I didn't have a center with at home, and I didn't have a core at home, that I found myself becoming a chameleon to adapt to other people's homes, right? To other people's morals and thoughts and feelings, and so I think my relationships in my life were very strong at a young age, and then I think as I got older, I knew, I think I learned a lot from having to build so many outside of relationships, that I was able to massage a lot to them, worked for me, and I think with time, a lot of them, I stretched myself very thin with them. Like they became less and less real and meaningful. I think as I've gotten older, I've found my own core, my own center, right, and my own self worth, and I've tried to rebuild a lot of those relationships. But I think a lot of them were built off of things that I don't actually, in the times where I was in pain and unsure of myself or and self worth, I think they were built off of a lot of different things that necessarily didn't align with my, who I am fully. Like I had my struggles with, partying and alcohol and et cetera, and drugs and stuff over the years, because I think to me, it wasn't something natural. I didn't, my high was playing, scoring a soccer goal. And then when that was gone and I'm building all these new relationships, the relationships get you high, right? Like we talked about, you asked about, women, and I've had different girlfriends, and like I think I found thrills in, or I sought out thrills with each of them, hoping that it would give me new highs, whether it was, a long term relationship or one that was very short term and passionate and crazy. So for me, relationships have they were never an issue. They until I stretched myself too thin with them and felt the need to follow, relationships to keep them, even if they led me down a path that I knew was wrong or I didn't necessarily, love or feel aligned with. So
Well, you're a dad now, and I'm a dad too. And I think one thing that I think you and I will agree on is that once you get to this phase in life, like you don't have time for the bullshit, right? You don't have time for the noise. You don't have time for the relationships that don't matter. You don't have time for the things that aren't going to either enhance your life or the life of your loved ones, whether it's your kids or, your partner or whoever it may be that's playing a role. And it's interesting because it could be a switch because once you have a kid, everything changes. But it also could be a process where once you start to take a hold of yourself and start to realize, after going down a certain path that like this path isn't making you whole, you slowly start to see that group of people that you are surrounding yourself by go down. Right?
sure. Yeah.
And, like, I can speak to the like, my numbers have gone like this, like and so speak to me about that experience and how that was like for you.
Well, I'll give you a perfect example that leads into that experience for me is I'm no longer with my daughter's mother. My daughter's name is Dakota Rose, and she's a sweet 10-year-old, just turned 10 in January. And her mother and I split, when she was under 2 years old. And one of the things I realized is that I had made all these friends. I was part of the group that traveled with a big group to Greece, and we did these fun things, big group dinners and brunches and etc. And it was a lot of fun. It was a fun period, even though. I knew at moments of it that I was overspending or I was over partying and etc. Just because I felt like I had a little core of my own, right? And then that didn't work out so well. We ended up having a lot of animosity, and the relationship became pretty toxic. I get into all of the back and forth or the reason why, but the truth is, they say the straw that broke the camel's back because there's 1,000 straws of equal size. And that's what our relationship felt like. It was like every other day was a battle. And when that split, there were a few bad things at the end and it got ugly. I realized pretty quickly who your friends are and who's really there for you because it's easy to be there for you when you're on top or when you're adding a lot of fun and value. It's hard to be there for someone when they're, and hurting and pain and stressed out. Are you going to roll your sleeves up and be there for them? Or are you like, all right, this was a passive friend this was a fun friend. They're no longer they're no longer helping us have fun, so we're going to move on from them. And I had a lot of that. And I think a lot of even from people that I was very close with, those, that I thought were, you know, I wouldn't say brothers and sisters, but in that scale where like I made friends and I mentioned I don't have brothers and sisters that I treated like family. And then I think, you know, with time, of course, everyone also has their own families and their own stuff, right? And just natural let your focus shifts to your own family, your own issues, your own problems that you don't want to take on necessarily someone else's. But I think going through that and then losing the crowd, it kind of spirals from there. It kind of like then you start, overthinking what relationships in general. Well, who really does care? And then, you're, it takes a shot at your ego again. And I think that's probably when I my ego was hit the hardest, and I probably then fell into another dark time for myself where I was lost and confused on like what's my self-worth now, or who I always told myself I was gonna be a big family man and have this big beautiful family because I didn't have one, and now I can't even keep my own. And then the struggles came. I remember actually after splitting up, I went like on a 6 month bender, you know, I was nuts. I like, traveling, clubbing, drinking, drugging. It was a bad time. So, that was that. I don't know where we
No,
go to next, but
no, thank you for sharing that. As you were speaking, I was just thinking because I know a few people who went through similar scenarios, and I don't know how old you are. I don't know if you mind sharing.
I'm 39 years old.
Yeah, so around the same age, like within, plus or minus like 5 years, and, you're not equipped for anything. You don't no one teaches you how to handle that, right? And as you were talking, all I kept thinking again was, well, 2 things, similar to what you said, you probably had this vision for yourself that you were trying to recreate your narrative based on the fact that you had a certain narrative growing up. But I can't help but think about the fact that also you were a very successful athlete. And if there's anyone that was probably prepared to handle, being given a deck of cards like that, it was someone who knew how to power through on the field. And so, I can't help but think that, and I don't know if I'm right with that or not. I mean, you look, there's nothing wrong with going on a 6-month bender because I'm pretty sure that a lot of us would do the same thing in that kind of
Right.
scenario.
Right.
But what matters most is how you bounce back after that bender. If you know me, you know that I like to look good and feel good. As an endurance athlete who trains daily, I need my wardrobe to fit the mold. Roan creates performance driven clothing for your active lifestyle. Each piece is designed for versatility and made with integrity to outfit you for an active life lived on your own terms. The Roan promise is to help you move forever forward. Use code MILE40 for 20% off online and in store for new customers only. Visit www.rhone.com, that's Rhone spelled RHONE, or find your local store and move forever forward starting today. So talk to me a little bit about, as an athlete, you probably don't like to lose.
That's exactly right. That's where I was going to go with it.
Yeah,
I hate to lose, right?
you
You
hate to
hate to
lose. You hate
lose.
to
Yeah.
lose. You're super competitive as an athlete, and this had to feel like one big giant L. And so, there's only so many ways that you can kind of handle that. So, I guess talk to me a little bit about the come to
Yeah.
moment after.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be honest with you, it was a difficult time and a dark time. And, I similarly to most, at some point realize, all right, you can't maintain this. You're not unhealthy and you're gonna, end up in a, gutter one day, right? And, I started to look inward. I did, I looked up Tony Robbins books, Wayne Dyer. I read a few self-help books, to try to get some inspiration. And I think what I gained from it was that, you know, through the chaos and confusion and craziness that I felt, I gained a lot of clarity. I started to think to myself, okay, what's important, what isn't. I took a few. I traveled to Bali and tried to, meditate and do things that I thought would be like more aligned with who I am, as an individual, morally, spiritually, and etc. It was a very uphill battle. This was approximately, 2018 now, and I came around to it though. I realized, okay, this is your life, and only you are going to be able to fix it, and only you should only have to rely on you to fix it. Not your mom, not your ex, not your friends. Certainly not your young daughter, right? So. I tried. I had a career shift. I owe a lot to, a few people that helped me through the career shift and mentor. I got out of nightlife, restaurants. I was a investor, partner, operator in a bunch of places while still doing my real estate, businesses at the time. I was a commercial broker doing retail leasing, like, representing landlords or tenants. like restaurants, putting them in their spaces. And, at the same time, the money I would make, I wanted to be cool, and I wanted to, thought that I was a person of significance if I owned, restaurants, and people knew who I was and came to them and got to drink on me, and I got to show them a good time, right? So I kind of steered away from that, and that, to jump into a little story, that comes from a young age too. My grandmother was a Persian caterer for like 35, 40 years. And my mom, like I mentioned, raised me as like a single mom. So a lot of times she needed to leave me with my grandma to go on, whatever she needed to do as a young adult, right? Whatever it was, work or life and I would spend a lot of times in these kitchens with my grandma, and it would be really cool. It was like a maestro, and in there, directing all these different people, and doing stuff herself and grabbing these big pots. And in those days, you didn't Google, wedding planner or caterer. It was all referral, word of mouth, and as an old culture, Persian culture, there's a certain kind of cuisine you want for their weddings. And these are big weddings, 500, 2,000, anywhere up to 1,000 people for some of these weddings. And it'd be really cool because at the end of the cooking, she would go into the bathroom. She was like Superwoman. She went in with a white apron. She came out with a black dress and red lipstick on, and then walked me through the wedding. And everyone, would cheer her and praise her for, oh, Encia, that's my grandma's name, Encia. Your dishes are the most delicious. And so I, at a young age, saw significance in that and praise in that, like that. My, grandma was known. Up until, maybe in the last year or two, I don't think I was known as Sean, but more in that community, more so Encia's grandson, So I think at a young age, I saw significance in that, and approval in that, and love in that. And, I think for me, real estate was just at the time a business to make a few dollars to pay for me to try to do more stuff with, restaurants and et cetera. So I invested in a bunch. But I think during my lack of years of having soccer, and my years of entering the drinking and partying, that realized it doesn't align with who I am as much, even though it's what I wanted. It wasn't healthy for me, and it was a little unsustainable. So I kind of got out of the business a little bit and focused more on the real estate career. And during that time, title insurance kind of fell into my lap. So it was a very serendipitous story too. I was in the middle of a split, with my ex, and I was living in a friend's building that they managed, in an apartment, small studio apartment in a walk-up building above a bar. And it was like, they were waiting to get permits to fix up the apartment. He's like, you could live there, we'll give you a few weeks notice until you got to get out, and then we need you to get out, we're going to fix up the apartments. So I was like, oh, amazing. At the time I was moved home living with my mom. My ex stayed in the apartment with our daughter. And I like get the phone call, you got to be out. And in a few weeks, like my second to last day in the apartment, I'm packing shit into garbage bags just to get out of there. It was the summer. I'm sweating. I'm in my suit. And someone calls my name from behind me, and it was someone I'd been friends with for a few years. I hadn't seen in a few years though, and they were just celebrating being acquired. And funny enough, he's asked me, how you doing? I'm like, oh, well, I'm really going through it. Work was slow. Obviously my relationship, I didn't give all the details, but I was like, it's been better. And he's like, oh, well, actually, we just celebrating being acquired. And I always thought you'd be a great fit for this. Can't believe I haven't seen you for years. We should sit down and talk. And we did. I met the whole team, and here we are, 8 years later, and I've started my own company, my own title insurance company. So it's cool. Now I have a focus. I realize what's important. My circle's smaller. I know that I want to be able to work hard and provide for my daughter, which has been hard because she, as I mentioned, I'm an Upper East Sider. Up until she was born on the Upper East Side, her mother and her lived a few 3 blocks away from me up until about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now. And now she lives in Long Island in Roslyn. So because my schedule is always, very fluid, you know. Yeah, and it's fluid, right? It's like I got a coffee today, a lunch tomorrow, a happy hour this day, whatever, for work purposes. It's not always that I can be there to pick her up to walk her to school like I used to when she lived 3 blocks away from me on the Upper East Side, or pick her up from school to walk her home. So I've now just, I know that, and I make sure that my time with her is that much more, important and focused. And I've been using this word a lot, intentional. I've been using that word now. Like, am I doing something with intent? And I now know that I have to, grind and build a company, and make get it to where I want, so that I can one day have another family, let's say, and have freedom to spend with my daughter how I choose. So that's kind of where I am now. I don't know if I probably skipped a few steps, but if you have
No, man,
anything.
I love it, and I love the story about, how things got going, with your career. I had a very similar story, that I've talked about previously and wrote about in my first book, where difference was I was on the Lower East Side, not on the Upper East Side, and, kind of had I was in that period of life where things were just not working out, and it was just the right person, right time, right conversation saying, "Hey, like, I think you'd be good for this. Like, let's figure this out." So you made me kind of think about that. And I think that that's honestly the beauty of New York City. It's a different energy, and you have those moments, and they change your life in different ways. Also, because like they're unexpected, and they bring out they make you realize that there are good people who see you for who you are and the work that you're doing. Um, and so it was cool to kind of hear that story
Yeah, it
come full
was
circle.
cool. It was very serendipitous. I literally was leaving the apartment, and they called my name, and they're like, "Yeah, we're here. That's so funny. What are you doing?" But it goes back to me having in my relationships. Like, I've always cared, so much so for other people that I meet, even if it had hurt me. So like you know, I people never leave me thinking Sean's an asshole. So even though there have been times where I've overextended myself, it's the times like that where they're like, you know what, this is a good dude. Like, this is a capable guy and charming guy, or whatever it is that they think of me, and it's because I treat everyone like, I think, and I have for so many years treated everyone like, oh, this is my best friend and brother. Even if it was a random drunk guy that I met one night, I was like, oh yeah, by the end of the night, we're best friends, aren't we? And I'm not saying that that's that was healthy part of it, but what I think
No, but the truth
was,
is, I will call this out really quick, right? Like that one guy, the drunk guy at the bar, right? Like, you know this, I know this, right? Like, alcohol is a mask. Like, we've both been through the phase, right? Like, and I think that at times, like those people who you have those one time conversations with, especially if you're authentic, which you clearly are, like they want to be seen. And that's one thing that I think someone like you and other people who've been on this show, because of the fact that you've been through, such dark moments in your life personally, you've had to deal with a lot of adversity. And again, on the outside, a lot of things could seem rosy to your point. Like you called out the fact that you grew up in an affluent neighborhood, but I'm pretty sure you would throw away the affluence for, a happy home.
sure,
Right. And
absolutely.
I think that one of the skills that you have and a lot of people who've been on this show have is the fact that you could see people where they are. And that's probably one of the most important skills. And one of the things that I really love about these stories and individuals like yourself who come on. Like, I'll be honest, man, when you when you came on before we started today, I was looking at the bio and I'm like, are we gonna talk about title insurance the whole time? Because I'm not really
Yeah.
sure. I'm not really sure how I'm gonna have this conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
But I
Most people don't even know what title insurance is.
but I
So
absolutely love where this conversation has gone because it lets us into the humanity behind you, right? Like people see you, and that's going to impact you. And you know what? What's most important about that is your daughter is going to feel that. Your daughter is going to see that. when she's talking about her dad, she's going to know the fact that her dad her dad's not perfect, uh, but no one is, and um, but he's a good person who sees people where they are.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I think one thing all of this has taught me from my dark times and my struggles with alcohol and partying and women and whatever, right? All of it, and my own family relationships. I think I gained a lot of wisdom through it, and I think one of the things that I take with me, and as you mentioned with see people, is that I no longer I've let go of ego and I never judge, right? Because how can you, when you've been through a lot yourself, and you think about that time and you imagine, wow, well, imagine everyone judged me for those lapse of, those momentary lapse in judgment for the rest of my life. And, I always say that you know, those moments don't define you. They're just meant to guide you. And for me, I hope that she would take something like that from, my story, because I'm not perfect. No one is. But as long as I, strive to be better, I'm happy with that.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on there. And, as you were speaking and talking about it, I remember I was reading an article recently, right before the Super Bowl. It was about Andy Reid, and the reporter went into his office. And I don't know how familiar you are with his story, but he's faced a lot of adversity on a
Yeah, his
personal
son
level.
passed, right?
His
One of
son
his sons
passed.
passed.
Yeah, I think his, other son had to deal with a conviction of sorts, and in his office, there's a sign that says, "Don't judge." And I think it kinda speaks to exactly what you're saying here is the fact that, again, you never know what people are going through, right? You don't know what they've seen, what they've been through, how they've interpreted it, how it's impacted their lives, how it's made them stronger, and more so, how it's allowed them to empower other people, right? Like, and I think a lot of us make this mistake all the time because it is so easy to judge, especially once you've seen, the other side of success, and once you know how hard it was to get there. It's easy to get a little arrogant sometimes. It's easy to kind of pat yourself on the back. But again, what I love about this story coming full circle is you know who you were at your worst.
Yeah.
And you know that if that guy can make a comeback, then you
Aaron,
got then
yeah.
you gotta give humanity a shot.
Yeah. Everyone loves a good comeback story.
That's it, my man.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
Sean, man, I look, I think I could talk to you for a long time, and I'm sure there are a lot of pieces that we're missing here to this story. One of the things I really love, and I'll just repeat it, is the fact that we didn't go down the road of talking about title insurance this whole time.
right.
Um, but when you look back on your story and you think about where you are today and you think about the takeaways, and all the lessons that you've learned, is there anything that you'd leave us with to kind of reflect on, right? Whether it's a mantra of sorts, or whether it's just a lesson that you've kind of stuck by, and would continue to reflect on your child.
I think for me, I would just say, um, you know, continue to find your way, right? To find your thing and to find your happiness. And I think for me, I got lucky in the sense that I worked in real estate, I worked in hospitality, and I found a happy medium in title insurance. Which, not to bore all your listeners, but for like those in the finance that listen to your podcast, it's like the sales trader of the real estate world. Basically, it's a due diligence insurance to make sure you don't inherit anything as a buyer from the seller, and it is a state regulated insurance. So what differentiates, one company from the other is obviously always service, but after that, it's usually relationships and with someone like me. So it allows me to be my hospitable self while working in the real estate realm, right? So I think for me, I didn't know what my career was going to be, and I constantly struggled. I was looking for the next thing, the next business, the next hustle. And, I think the idea I'm trying to say is find your own thing, is don't give up on yourself, right? And think that, you're happiness is determined by a certain dollar on a paycheck. Your happiness is worth more than that. And I think for me, I just feel lucky that, I'm starting to figure it out.
Shaun, thank you so much, man. Thank you for coming on, for opening up, for being vulnerable with us. And honestly, for just giving us a lot to reflect on. Like, you are as real as they come, and that's
Thanks, man.
really, really, really special. Not just to me as the host, because I didn't really have to work that hard to get this out of you, which I appreciate. But me as a person, man, like I am so sincerely grateful that people like you exist, because there's one thing that I know, especially now, as I kind of continue down the path of fatherhood, is that there's no handbook. I don't have it figured out. I don't know what I'm doing 99% of the time. And I need people like you. I need to know people like you exist. So that way I know we're in this together. So thanks for
Yeah,
coming
man.
on, and thanks for sharing.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It was an
You,
honor.
you got it. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode of the Mile 40 podcast, go ahead, subscribe, leave a review, and share the word. Thank you for being a part of the Mile 40 family. And let's unite in showing the world that comebacks are always greater than setbacks.